She walked into her boyfriend's apartment on a cool October night and was never seen again. The cameras saw her go in, but they never saw her come out. What happened to Kelly Dwyer? The night of October 10, 2013, wrapped Milwaukee in a cool, quiet chill as Kelly Dwyer finished her shift at the boutique. She stepped outside, the autumn air brushing her face, her breath puffing out in faint clouds. At 27, Kelly had a gift, a warm smile that could brighten the gloomiest day, a way of chatting with anyone that left them feeling like old friends. She waved to a coworker locking up, a quick flick of her hand, and shot off a text to a friend. She was headed to her boyfriend's place downtown. Kris Zocco lived in a fancier part of the city, a world apart from Kelly's everyday life of folding clothes and dreaming about maybe opening her own shop someday. They'd been dating a few months, and his fast-paced vibe seemed to spark something new in her, a little thrill she hadn't known she craved. She pulled her light jacket tighter, the wind tugging at her hair, and walked off into the night, never guessing she was stepping into a riddle that would haunt Milwaukee for years. A security camera caught her at 2:37 a.m. on October 11th, slipping into Zocco's apartment building. She wore jeans and a jacket, a small purse dangling from her shoulder, her steps easy, like it was just another late night. The footage was fuzzy, the kind that makes you squint to be sure, but it showed her crossing into the lobby clear enough. What it didn't show was her coming back out. That blurry clip became the last anyone saw of Kelly Dwyer alive. A frozen moment that would stick in the minds of her family and the cops hunting for answers. The lobby was nothing special. Plain white walls, cold tiles, a low buzz from the lights, but soon it'd be picked apart. Every shadow studied like it might spill the truth. That missing exit shot gnawed at everyone, a loose thread in a story that wouldn't unravel easy. By the next day, Kelly's phone went dead quiet. She wasn't the type to ghost people. She'd always text back quick, always show up for work on time, her steady presence a comfort at the boutique. Customers adored her. Her boss counted on her. So when she didn't turn up for her weekend shift on October 12th, her friends' stomachs dropped. They called her over and over, each unanswered ring twisting their worry tighter. Her mom, Maureen, out in another corner of Wisconsin, woke up with a sick feeling she couldn't shake, like a weight pressing on her chest. She kept dialing Kelly's number, leaving voicemails that piled up, her voice cracking with every word. By Monday, when her manager said she'd missed 2 days straight, something Kelly just didn't do, Maureen and a friend sped to the Milwaukee police station. Their hands shook as they filled out the missing person report, their words tumbling out in a rush, pleading for someone to listen. The cops jotted it all down but didn't jump right in. Missing adults, they said, sometimes just take off, give it a little time. But Kelly's people wouldn't hear it. Sure, she loved a spur-of-the-moment hike now and then, but she'd never ditch her friends or her job without a word. It wasn't her. Word spread fast, rippling out from her tight circle to coworkers, folks she'd met once or twice, even shop owners around town. The boutique churned out flyers with a picture of Kelly in a floral sundress, her grin lighting up the page. People taped them to poles, stuck them on coffee shop boards, pressed them against diner windows, anywhere eyes might land. Volunteers handed them out on street corners, their faces tight with hope, while others shared her photo online, praying it'd spark a lead. Days dragged on, and still no Kelly. The silence ate at everyone. News crews showed up, parking outside Zocco's building, their voices low and serious as they gave updates on TV. They rolled that grainy clip of her walking in, her small figure swallowed by the night. It looked so ordinary, just a girl heading inside after a long day. But everyone kept asking, what happened next? Why didn't she come out? Milwaukee held its breath, the question hanging heavy. The streets she'd walked that night feeling emptier somehow. The quiet stretched on, a dark tease of what was to come, pulling the city deeper into a mystery that wouldn't let go. Section 2. A city searches, a suspect emerges. The days after Kelly Dwyer vanished blurred into a mess of fear and restless energy for the people who knew her. Milwaukee hummed with quiet talk about the girl who disappeared after walking into her boyfriend's downtown apartment. Her friends couldn't just wait around. They grabbed flyers with her picture, that bright smile of hers cutting through the worry knotting their chests, and hit the streets. They poked into bars, checked empty parks, wandered down forgotten alleys, asking anyone who'd listen if they'd seen her. Bartenders shook their heads, shopkeepers frowned, strangers shrugged. Every no hit like a punch. Businesses around town pitched in too, sticking Kelly's posters in their windows, each one a desperate call for help. That photo of her in a floral sundress started popping up everywhere, a painful jolt of the life that had gone still. People sipping coffee in diners stared at her face, whispering hopes she'd turn up safe, while moms rushing kids to school stole quick looks, their hearts sinking as the city pulled together, clinging to a fading chance. The cops started slow, but by the end of that first week with no Kelly, they kicked things up. They sat Kris Zocco, her boyfriend and the last guy to see her, down more than once. His story was short and flat. She came over that night, they hung out, and she took off early the next morning. He said he didn't know where she went after that. But it didn't add up. Those cameras all over his building never caught her leaving. That blank spot ate at the detectives. Did she sneak out some back way, or did something worse keep her there? They poked around his apartment, hunting for anything off, a smear of blood, a messed up rug, but it looked too normal, almost creepy in how calm it was. They paced the tight halls, boots thumping on the floor, eyes darting over every inch, looking for a hint of that night's truth. The investigation dug deeper, chasing Kelly's tracks through her phone and online life. Cops pulled her call logs, bank records, anything that might point somewhere. Her phone's last ping came from near Zocco's place, a tiny crumb that fit but didn't explain much. No weird charges on her card, no posts or texts about running off or trouble brewing, just nothing. That quiet screamed louder than anything, twisting the knot of dread her family couldn't shake. By week 2, newspapers splashed her story across their front pages, bold letters shouting, "Missing in Milwaukee. Where is Kelly Dwyer?" People ate it up, but rumors started flying too. Someone swore they saw her at a gas station miles away. Another said she'd bolted out of state with some mystery guy. Cops chased every whisper, headlights slicing through dark country roads, but every trail fizzled out, leaving them empty-handed and the hope dimmer each time. Zocco's name kept bubbling up, though. On October 17, 2013, not even a week after Kelly went missing, he got nabbed for drugs and kid porn, stuff they found stashed in his place. It wasn't tied to her case, but it smeared a black mark across how anyone saw him. Could a guy like that be straight about what happened? They asked folks living near his building, and a few remembered hearing muffled voices or a door banging shut that night. Nobody could swear it was Kelly, though, and that loose end drove the cops nuts. They knew time was slipping away fast. In those bare interview rooms, they leaned hard into Zocco, firing questions, watching him dodge with short, slippery answers, the tension thick enough to choke on. Winter started creeping in, the cold settling over Milwaukee like the heavy ache in Kelly's loved ones' hearts. Maureen, her mom, stepped up to talk to the press, her voice shaky as she spilled out the torture of not knowing. She held up a picture from some old family day, Kelly's laugh stuck in the frame, so alive against the gray mess they were in now. The city couldn't shake it. How does someone everybody knew just vanish in a place rigged with cameras? Cops kept at it, squinting at fuzzy footage from parking lots and side streets, desperate for a flicker of her. Every lead dangled a thread of maybe, every dead end yanked it away, and Milwaukee sat tight, waiting for whatever dark piece would fall next, the chill outside matching the shadow growing inside. Section 3. The Discovery in Jefferson County. Winter 2013 melted into spring, then summer, and still, Kelly Dwyer was nowhere to be found. Milwaukee kept moving, but for the people who loved her, her absence hung heavy, a constant ache they couldn't shake. The flyers plastered around town started to fade, their edges curling under the sticky summer heat, though the hope of seeing her walk back into their lives burned low, like a candle about to sputter out. By May 2015, 18 months had crawled by since she'd stepped into Kris Zocco's apartment building that October night. The city had slipped into a tense calm, broken only by the odd news blurb guessing at what might have happened. Then, on May 1st, 2015, the ground shifted. A farmer out in Jefferson County, some 45 miles west of Milwaukee, was trudging across his land. Rough patches of dirt, tall grass swaying in the breeze, trees dotting the horizon, when he stopped cold. Under a tangle of bushes, he spotted bones, weathered and bare, poking out of the earth. His breath caught, the wind whistling past, and with shaky hands, he fumbled for his phone to call the cops, knowing deep down he'd stumbled onto something awful. Police swarmed in fast, stringing up yellow tape that snapped in the wind. The spot was way out there. Not a place you'd just wander into, and that alone made them think whoever left those bones wanted them lost for good. Forensic folks showed up with their kits, stepping soft and slow, treating every speck of dirt like it might tell the story. They knew a single thread, a chipped earring, or the way the soil clumped could crack the case wide open. Cameras clicked, freezing the scene in sharp flashes while experts crouched low, brushing away debris with steady hands, their jaws tight with focus. Word got out quick, buzzing through Milwaukee like static. Could this be Kelly? No one wanted to say it out loud, not yet. News vans rolled up, reporters hovering just beyond the tape, lenses trained on the slow dance of officers across the field, the air thick with a waiting nobody could name. Identifying those bones took time, a slow grind Kelly's family could hardly stand. They checked dental records, each tick of the clock a knife twist, until May 7th, 2015, when the call came. It was her. The news hit Milwaukee like a gut punch, rocking a city that had held its breath for her all those months. For some, it eased the torment just a bit. At least they knew where she was, could put her to rest proper. But mostly, it broke them. No happy ending, no Kelly bursting through the door with a laugh. She was gone, probably hurt bad, and someone had dumped her out there to rot. Maureen, her mom, stood up to talk, friends at her side holding old photos of Kelly grinning wide. Her voice cracked as she poured out her grief, swearing her girl's life wouldn't just be this sad ending, she'd fight for justice. Her words carried over the crowd outside the coroner's place, faces wet with tears, hands clenched, nodding like they'd fight too. That find flipped the investigation hard. Cops locked down the site, treating it like a murder scene, sure the clues buried there could name Kelly's killer. 18 months of Wisconsin weather, freezing snow, soaking rain, had chewed up the remains, making it tough to say how she died. Was it a chokehold, a blow, something else? The experts couldn't be sure, but they didn't give up. They poked at her bones for cracks, sifted the dirt for poison traces, anything that might whisper the truth. Near the body, they found bits. A bracelet, a shred of cloth, and bagged them up careful gloved hands moving slow, hoping the lab could tie them to Zocco or someone else. Every move was a quiet plea for a break, a way to see past the decay and into that last night. Weeks rolled on, and that patch of Jefferson County stayed busy. Cop cars lined the back roads, lights off but heavy in the stillness, spooking folks who'd never thought their sleepy fields could hold such a secret. The team kept at it, combing every inch, looking for a shoe print, a snapped twig, anything that stuck out. Milwaukee waited, hearts in throats, for the next drop of news. Finding her answered one big question, where she'd been all this time, but it cracked open something worse. Who'd left her there, alone in the dirt, and why? The cops believed the answer was in that mess of evidence, and they weren't about to stop digging no matter how long it took. The weight of it all pressed down, a city aching for peace, caught between relief and the dark pull of what came next. Section 4. The investigation tightens around Zocco. When Kelly Dwyer's bones turned up in Jefferson County in May 2015, the Milwaukee police felt the clock ticking hard. Decay was eating away at whatever secrets her body still held, and with the word that those remains were hers, all eyes locked on Kris Zocco. He'd been on their radar since day one, and now they had something solid to chase. Zocco wasn't new to trouble. Back in November 2014, he'd been nailed for 16 counts of kid porn, landing him a 19-year stretch starting January 2015. That mess didn't tie straight to Kelly, but it sketched a guy who wasn't what he seemed, and with her body dug up, cops were hell-bent on pinning her death on him. They hit his downtown apartment again, moving fast this time, tearing through it for anything they might have missed. Bedsheets, gadgets, random stuff. They hauled it all out for the lab, praying for a speck of Kelly's DNA or a scuff mark that'd blow his story. She left safe and sound, right out of the water. Detectives crept through the place, gloves on, lifting things slow, peering into every shadow for a hair, a smudge, anything screaming she'd fought or fallen there. The forensics were a nightmare. Kelly's remains had sat out there 18 months, through snow, rain, heat, and time had scrubbed away the easy answers. Docs couldn't say for sure if she'd been choked, hit, or doped up. The bones just wouldn't talk clear. But the way she was buried, slapped in a shallow hole, tucked under bushes in the middle of nowhere, screamed guilt. Nobody hides a body like that unless they've got blood on their hands. They scraped dirt from the site, hunting for bits of Zocco's life. Maybe a fiber from his jacket, a chemical he'd touched. They combed the field for tire ruts, signs a car had rolled through. Then there were the dogs. Cadaver hounds that had sniffed around his building way back and caught Kelly's scent by the trash chute. That hit meant something now. A shiver down the spine clue she might have been dragged out quiet, dodging every camera. The handlers stood by as the dogs nosed the concrete, their sharp yips bouncing off the walls, each one a jab at the life snuffed out. Zocco's words got a fresh look, too. He'd stuck to his line. Kelly walked out early October 11th, 2013, but that empty camera reel kept nagging at them. They hauled him in again, leaning close, picking at his story. What'd they eat? What was on TV? When'd she leave? His answers shifted just enough to itch, cool as ice but thin somehow, like he was hiding the real night behind a fog. Cops got warrants and dove into his phone, pulling call logs, tracking where it pinged after she vanished. The map lit up weird. His signal headed toward Jefferson County right after, with blank spots like he'd flipped it off to ghost them. Had he driven out there, Kelly's body in the trunk to ditch her in the dark? Analysts hunched over desks, coffee going cold, tracing those faint dots across Wisconsin, each one a thread they hoped led straight to him. Out front, the police played it close, tossing out scraps about new leads or data checks. But behind the scenes, they were grinding, talking to Zocco's buddies, his old co-workers, anyone who'd seen him with Kelly. They fished for hints he'd been rough, jealous, anything ugly enough to end her. A few mentioned he'd had drugs around, tying back to that earlier bust, and it cracked open a thought. Maybe she'd OD'd, and he'd panicked. Or maybe it was colder than that. Those creepy videos they'd found before, stashed on his gear, didn't help his case either. Not about Kelly, but they painted him darker, a guy with shadows nobody'd guessed. Detectives sat up late, screens glowing, watching those clips for any flicker that might connect the dots. Milwaukee watched it all, holding its breath. News trucks parked out in Jefferson County, catching cops pacing the fields, their faces blank but set. Back home, Kelly's people lit candles at vigils, flames trembling as they faced the hard truth she wasn't coming back. The cops knew leads were drying up. People forget, stuff breaks down, but they wouldn't let it die. Every call log, every chat, every lab slip was a step closer. The air got tighter each day, the city feeling the squeeze as they zeroed in on Zocco, dead set on proving what plenty already felt. He'd done it. Her death wasn't just out in that field. It was tangled in the lies he'd spun, and they were ready to rip them apart, no matter what it took. Section 5. The Trial of Kris Zocco. By May 2017, almost 4 years after Kelly Dwyer disappeared, the Milwaukee police had pieced together enough to hit Kris Zocco with charges that carried real weight. First-degree reckless homicide, hiding a corpse, and strangulation or suffocation. Zocco was already locked up, doing 19 years for child pornography since 2015. But now he'd face a courtroom to answer for the pain that had gripped the city since October 2013. The trial kicked off September 24, 2018, in a Milwaukee courthouse stuffed with folks, reporters scribbling fast, onlookers craning their necks, Kelly's family sitting tight with heavy hearts. Over 2 weeks, more than 65 people stepped up to testify, their words spinning a messy web of clues prosecutors prayed would stick Zocco with guilt for good. The room felt thick, like you could feel every breath, every word dropping hard with what had happened to a girl gone too soon. Old benches squeaked under the crowd, all eyes glued to Zocco, his face blank as a wall, like the chaos around him didn't touch him. The prosecution told a story that chilled the bones. Kelly died in Zocco's apartment, maybe choked out in a bad moment. Instead of calling for help, they said, he hauled her off to a lonesome field in Jefferson County to bury his secret. They pulled up phone data showing his signal creeping that way right after she was last seen, with blank spots where it went quiet. Him dodging eyes, they figured. Texts from his phone cut deep too. One to a pal grumbling she couldn't handle what I do, saying he'd deal with that later, dark as night looking back. They pointed at the rough grave out there, dug fast and shallow, hinting at panic or plan, and said his slippery excuses after showed he knew he'd done wrong. They made him out as a guy whose nasty side boiled over, dumping Kelly to wipe it clean. The lead prosecutor's voice filled the place, steady and sharp, laying out a picture of a cold man picking quiet over saving her, someone he'd said he cared about. Zocco's defense threw up a different take. They said Kelly OD'd, a sad slip tied to drugs she'd messed with on her own. Zocco freaked, they claimed, and stashed her body instead of dialing for help, scared his rap sheet would bury him either way. They dug into the forensics, or what wasn't there. Her body was too far gone to say how she went. No choke marks, no busted bones. Without that, they argued, there's no proof he meant to kill. They poked at the cops, too. Did they zero in on Zocco too quick, skip other paths? What if she'd walked out and run into trouble somewhere else? Their play was to stir up doubt, painting him as a fool, not a murderer. The defense lawyer kept it even, his questions like little jabs, pushing the jury to see holes in the tale. It was a back and forth, both sides tugging at bits of truth to win the jury. Prosecutors leaned on how Zocco acted after she vanished, how he didn't seem to care, how his stories shifted, that phone trail tying him to the field. They brought in experts who shrugged at how she died but said the burial smelled like a cover-up. The defense turned that back, making those experts admit they couldn't swear to much, calling the murder charge a leap. Zocco sat there quiet, face mostly empty, though now and then his eyes slid to Kelly's mom, Maureen, holding a pendant with her girl's picture, tears slipping down silent. Her being there weighed heavy, a living piece of what was lost against all the legal noise. The crowd stayed still, just the rustle of papers or a cough cutting through the thick air. After weeks of it, the jury huddled up and came back quick, 2 hours flat, on October 5, 2018. Guilty, every count. Zocco got hit with first-degree reckless homicide, hiding a corpse, and strangulation or suffocation. The room broke loose. Kelly's family cried hard, relief tangled with ache, while Zocco's crew sat stunned, muttering about an appeal. December 14, 2018, brought sentencing, a tough close. Prosecutors called him slick, hammering how he'd left her family with nothing by hiding her. The judge went with it, piling 31 years on his 1950 total, plus a 10 grand fine for stashing her body. Zocco got marched off, cuffs clicking, leaving a question hanging. Was this justice, or did the doubts from that room still echo? The gavel's bang lingered, a last sound in a trial that had held a city tight, leaving grief and a few loose threads behind. Aftermath and unanswered shadows. When the guilty verdict came down against Kris Zocco, it felt like a bittersweet sigh for Milwaukee, a city that had carried Kelly Dwyer's story through 5 long, heavy years. On December 14, 2018, in that packed courtroom, the judge handed down a 31-year sentence for her death. Kelly's mom, Maureen, sat still, clutching a tiny pendant with her daughter's picture inside. Tears rolled down her face as the judge spoke of Zocco's betrayal, how he left Kelly's body in a lonely field in Jefferson County, how he let her family suffer for 18 months with no answers. It was a sentence stacked on top of the 19 years he was already serving for unrelated crimes, locking him away for 50 years. By the time he'd even have a shot at release, he'd be 90. For Maureen and the people who loved Kelly, the verdict wasn't joy, but it was something. At least now, she could be laid to rest knowing justice had shown up, even if too late. But the ache of losing her didn't fade, and no amount of time behind bars would ever fix that. As the courtroom emptied, shoes scuffed the floor, a quiet rhythm to the muffled sobs of her family, their relief weighed down by the truth that no ruling could bring Kelly back. In the weeks after, Milwaukee mourned her in its own way. Friends and strangers gathered in candlelit vigils, standing together in the December cold, sharing memories of her laugh, her kindness, the way she made people feel seen. That smile of hers, once plastered on missing person flyers, became something more, a quiet symbol of a life cut too short. Maureen spoke at one of the gatherings, her voice steady but thick with grief, promising that Kelly's story wouldn't be reduced to just its tragic ending. People listened, some wiping their eyes, others standing in silence, absorbing the weight of what had been lost. Support poured in. Small donations, handwritten notes, meals left at the doorstep. Little things, but together they formed a net of kindness, a reminder that even in grief, people could still reach for each other. On the news, reporters played clips of Zocco being led away in handcuffs, his face blank, while neighbors said they felt a little safer with him gone. Parks shimmered with candlelight for nights on end, each flickering flame a quiet tribute to Kelly, a girl who had touched more lives than she ever knew. Zocco's lawyers weren't done, though. They filed appeals, arguing that the forensic evidence wasn't enough, that references to his past had turned the jury against him. They pointed to the fact that no one could say exactly how Kelly had died. Maybe it had been an accident, they claimed, and Zocco had just made a terrible decision afterward. But as of March 2025, the courts hadn't budged. The jury had believed the evidence, even with its gaps, and for now, Zocco was still where they had put him. The case left a lasting mark on Milwaukee's legal system, a reminder of how hard it is to convict when there's no clear cause of death. Prosecutors had built their case on shaky ground, circumstantial evidence, gaps in Zocco's story, suspicious phone records, and the simple, horrifying fact that Kelly had been hidden instead of helped. It turned into a quiet debate among legal minds, law students huddled over textbooks in dim-lit classrooms, professors debating how justice holds up when the whole truth stays just out of reach. For Kelly's family, time moved differently after the trial. They tried to carve a path through the grief, each step feeling heavier than the last. They held a small, private memorial, scattering her ashes in a place she had loved to hike, where the trees whispered in the wind, where the air still held something of her presence. Maureen didn't stop fighting. She spoke at events for missing persons, urging people to recognize the warning signs in relationships, to listen to their instincts, to never stop searching when someone disappears. Kelly's case sent ripples through Milwaukee, shaking people awake to the dangers that could lurk just out of sight. It made people more aware of the vulnerability young women face, of the importance of looking out for each other. It also exposed a harsh truth about surveillance. There were cameras all over the city, yet not one had caught Kelly's final moments. Investigators had been left to piece together a puzzle with missing pieces, filling in the blanks as best they could. Schools and community centers put up her picture, her story a warning, a lesson, a call to action. Don't let another tragedy slip through the cracks. Even with Zocco behind bars, though, doubt still hung in the air. The forensic evidence hadn't given clear answers. Had there been a struggle in that apartment? Or had a reckless night spiraled into something neither of them had expected? The lack of certainty gnawed at people who had followed the case from the beginning, a reminder that justice, even when served, doesn't always bring closure. But the city moved forward, carrying Kelly's name with it. She wasn't just a headline or a courtroom story. She was someone who had laughed, loved, dreamed. Her name stayed etched into Milwaukee's memory, a quiet reminder to hold on to the good in people, to seek truth even when it hides in the darkest places. The skyline stood watch over her story, lights blinking in the night, a faint echo of the hope that had once burned for her safe return. Now, those same lights shone with something else, a promise to remember her, to learn from her story, to keep fighting for the ones who never make it home. And if Kelly's story has reached you, if it stirred something in your heart, don't let it stop here. Join us, hit subscribe, be part of the voice that refuses to let stories like hers be forgotten. Together, we can keep shining a light where it's needed most.